So today I want to talk a little bit about this journey I've had as a person of color and some of what I've learned and how it has sort of expanded my view in the world. And so I guess to start off, what I want to say is that it wasn't really that long ago that I didn't actually have a sense of my racial identity. I'd spent actually most of my life trying to avoid admitting it was even part of who I was. For context, I am the product of an interracial marriage. So I have a white mother. She married my Black father in 1969. So I always like to say that they were revolutionaries in some way because that was a pretty big deal back then. 9 years later, they had me, their oldest child. And by the time I was in grade 5, they had already split. And that as well was a bit of a revolutionary act because I was the first kid at school who had parents who weren't together. So in my home, I was raised by my mother and her mother, my Nana, these two fierce, exceptional, strong, and resilient white women. And my other formative relationship really was my younger sister, Toby, who's also biracial. And unlike me, Toby is actually white passing. So if you look at her, you can't really tell that she's Black. She has blonde hair, she has blue eyes, she has thin lips, a narrow nose, sort of all these things that as a kid growing up, I knew were what I wanted to attain, but that were really out of reach, right? I was never gonna change how I looked. But these three women were really my basis for everything, for womanhood, and what I understood was valuable in the world. And between being in relationship with them at home and then also being at school as one of the only kids of color in my class, I sort of grew up with this sense that there was something everyone else had that I didn't. And I learned very young that if I paid close enough attention, there might come some point where I could figure out what it was they had that I didn't. And to be honest with you, this question really plagued me until my early 40s. I really never could figure out what it was about me that was less than. I just knew it was there. And really everything came to a head in 2020. Like many people, it was a big year for me. I was working for myself. I was a yoga teacher. I was a teacher trainer. I was running all over the city, working 6-7 days a week, running myself into the ground, trying to be both successful, but also be relevant. And when we went into that first lockdown, I remember the first feeling I had was absolute relief, that I could stop and that I could rest and that I could take time for myself. But that was also really shocking to me because I had built this life that I thought was my dream, and I couldn't figure out what it was that had me so relieved to be away from it. And in the first few months, I ended up in this group online with a bunch of other Black fitness and wellness professionals. We started having conversations. We started sharing about the struggles of being in these careers and these lives. And we started to build this really powerful community that kind of held us through the struggles of that time. And it also sort of shone a light on the fact that we'd been missing something. We'd all been operating in fitness and wellness spaces on our own. And so what we decided to do was build this community for ourselves. And we actually co-founded a not-for-profit. It's called the Black Wellness Cooperative, or we call it the BWC. And what we wanted to offer people is what we found for ourselves. So first of all, access to wellness and fitness resources, especially for Black and underserved communities. But we're also really passionate as well about community and joy and the permission we get when we're with people that are like us in all kinds of different ways. And if you've ever been othered or marginalized in a space, you might be able to relate to this experience, but there's something that happens where you know sometimes you have to be better to be seen as equal. But you also have this other experience where you know you can't be too good or you can't take up too much space because it can be affronting or it can be threatening. And so you learn to be hyper vigilant about how much of yourself you dole out in the spaces you frequent. And it can be really exhausting. And it can also be really, really isolating as well, which is interesting. You know, and being in this group began to sort of liberate us, all of us, in different ways from that experience. You know, for me, once we'd formed the group, we came out of lockdown, I went right back into the way I'd been living. So I went back to working sun up to sundown, running myself into the ground, trying to be everywhere all at once, and really afraid to miss an opportunity. So I would never say no to anything someone asked me to do. And I remember it was this like random Saturday. I had been teaching in the morning. I'd already worked every day that week. I was sitting at the stoplight before the McDonald Bridge, and I was supposed to get to a BWC event and then run from there to a party at my sister's, which was a really big deal, and I was going to be late to that. And I was sitting at the light, and I could either go straight over the bridge home, or I could turn right to go into the north end where the event was. And all of a sudden, I realized that I could just not go to the event. Like I could just text or send a message and say, hey folks, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I'm gonna go home, and I have somewhere else to be that's more important. And I could trust that there was enough of them there that that would be okay. So the interesting thing is, that had never happened for me, or at least I don't recall it ever having happened, right? This moment where I thought you don't have to go, you don't have to show up, and you can more than that, even admit that you're tired and you're exhausted and you're not entirely yourself. And for me, that was a really big moment. The biggest thing about it is that I saw it happening, and then also that I completely understood before that light turned green and I got to travel over the bridge and go home, that it was also related to the fact that I was in community with people like me, that I suddenly had a different kind of permission because I was functioning and working with other Black practitioners. And we'd also built an organization where there wasn't one person in power. We shared that equally. And so there wasn't somebody that I was answering to. And it was a really amazing moment because it's changed the course of my life in these last few years. And when I was getting ready to sort of do this talk and speak about it, you know, I initially wanted to speak mostly about the permission, you know, to not show up, to let people know when you're not functioning at 100%, to say no to certain things. And then in the last month, when I've sort of been going through this amazing few weeks in my life and career, and even prepping for this talk, I thought it would be really important as well to remind myself, and then all of you, that it's really important we also have the permission to be exceptional. You know, that we need to build spaces where people do not have to lessen or diminish themselves, because amazing things happen when we have the space to show up fully as ourselves, to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to be exceptional, to be brave. And I think what I wanted to sort of impart on all of you and what I've learned through this experience of being in this amazing organization with these absolutely astounding humans is that leadership is not what we impose on other people, right? We sometimes think it is, that I can be in charge and I can tell you all how you're supposed to be. But the power of leadership, true leadership when it's profound, is being in relationship with the people that you are leading. And we can't do that if we aren't also showing up authentically as well, which means that we have to model what we're asking for. And we have to be willing to be all of ourselves, which is sometimes imperfect and sometimes exceptional and sometimes brave and sometimes terrified and all the things in between. And so what I've taken away from this experience with these beautiful humans is that, you know, leading is about being in community, right? Is about showing up. Amazing things can happen when we do it with the kinds of people who allow us to be all of ourselves. Thank you.